Zimbabwean governments, its officials and corporate leaders are preparing for a major capital markets conference in London, United Kingdom, during the last week of next month to raise private capital to finance domestic development. The event will be a gathering of key players in the primary capital markets, corporate leaders, financial institution, investment bank executives and heads of public accounting firms, as well as secondary market players such as fund managers and stockbrokers. This gathering is meant to showcase the local capital markets to international investors, including the diaspora investing community, in order to mobilize capital. Now, this morning, joining me from Harare, Zimbabwe, is Dr. Prosper Chitambara, developmental economist, and he will be shedding more light on this, and he will be telling us how important this is for Zimbabwe and its bourse. Thank you so much, Dr. Prosper, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, according to the Zimbabwean government, the objective of this particular event is to showcase capital markets in Zimbabwe to international investors, or should we say potential investors, as the case may be, and of course, diaspora investment communities. But then that would depend on acceptability by these foreign investors for the bourse. So, we'd like to know how much interest have they shown over time for Zimbabweans' capital markets? Have they shown much interest? Are they particular about what potential Zimbabweans' bourse has to offer?
Well, we have seen a gradual increase in terms of interest by investors and financiers. Of course, it's been gradual, it's been slow. The government introduced the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, where trading is exclusively in USD. I think the major challenge has been the uncertainties that were created by the chronic high inflationary environment, and the expectation is that as the high inflation comes down, then I'm sure that's going to show up a lot of interest from investors across the world. So I think there's still a lot of work that we need to do to enhance the macroeconomic environment, because investors would not want to put resources or invest their capital in an environment where there is a bit of instability, macroeconomic instability. And also, I think in the past, what has tended to affect investments and capital inflows has been the uncertainties around the issue of the currency. But the government has tried to clarify that, and we are hoping that that should help to allay some of the fears and concerns by investors. But I think ultimately what an investor will look at before they can actually invest is the macroeconomic environment. Is it stable and conducive enough to give that investor the maximum return on investment on his dollar invested?
Talking about a market being stable, that's market stability as the case may be, the World Bank said that capital markets can accelerate economically if they promote domestic savings and increase the quality and quantity of its investments. So are you saying that Zimbabwe's capital market is prepared for this? Does it have the capacity for this?
Well, I think the capacity is there. If we are only able to sort out these macro factors, these policy factors, the institutional factors, really, because those, I think, are the ones that then engender greater levels of confidence, certainty, and stability within the investment environment. So I think once that's sorted out, then definitely there's going to be, we should be able to mobilize more resources from our capital markets.
All right, now I'd like you to give your verdict on this on a scale of 1 to 10 between investment roadshows and selling of foreign bonds. Which would you say is better, most especially for Zimbabwe and its stock market and its economy?
I think the bonds are a bit problematic for Zimbabwe, given our high external areas. So I think it will be very difficult for us to be able to get fresh capital borrowings, fresh borrowings, fresh loans, in view of the fact that we've been struggling to pay back our arrears. So I think our best bet would be to try as much as possible to attract as much investment and capital inflows into the economy by making sure that we address some of the critical binding constraints to investments within the economy.
All right, let's take a cue from Mauritius that has been described as a burgeoning and a blossoming financial hub in Africa, as it were. And the way we see it, it seems that as Zimbabwe is using Mauritius as a model sort of for Victoria Falls. So why choose Victoria Falls as a case study, most especially to project its image and its capacity, of course, its potential to the would-be investors?
Yeah, I think Big Falls is probably the most known tourist attraction in the country, and government has already designated it a special economic zone, but focusing largely on capital, on investments. So obviously, it makes sense to designate the Big Falls, given the fact that it's one of the major tourist attractions. Of course, not just in Zimbabwe, but across the African continent. And we've seen a bit of traction also on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange in terms of new listings. But again, it's been rather slow. I think those uncertainties, especially around the macroeconomy, around policies, I think would need to be sorted out to unlock more listings and more capital into the VFX, the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange.
All right, Doctor, in our previous conversation, the IMF, I interacted with one of our guests, and talking about what IMF said in terms of physical cash too much in circulation, about 60% of that in circulation in the formal and informal sector in South Africa, and that is somehow threatening financial stability in the country. Is that the case for Zimbabwe also?
Yeah, that has always been a major challenge, too much liquidity within the economy, which has obviously had a destabilizing effect on the economy in the sense that the productive base or capacity of the economy has not increased in line with the massive increase in liquidity that the economy has actually been generating. So that has had some inflationary implications. Of course, it's understandable given the fact that the Zimbabwean economy is now largely informal, and most of the transactions within the informal economy are cash-based. So it creates a lot of challenges, really, when liquidity, both physical and virtual liquidity, is actually increasing at a faster pace than the rate at which the economy is actually growing, or the aggregate supply within the economy is growing. It creates excess aggregate demand, which then has a destabilizing effect on the overall macroeconomy.
You're saying that the virtual liquidity is also a bit of a challenge for the financial system and its economy. But then, don't you think that the use of digital platforms, maybe some sort of e-transactions, fintechs coming into play could douse the tension, so to speak, and give it a bit of viability in terms of spread, connection, transactions going on within the financial ecosystem?
So the virtual liquidity really it's not like the digital currency, but these are balances within the banking sector, either in terms of net claims on government or even net claims on the private sector. So that's been highly unsustainable in the sense that it has resulted in a massive increase in broad money supply, which is actually directly linked to inflation. So the central bank has actually done a paper that has actually revealed that there is a direct relationship between broad money supply and inflationary pressures within the Zimbabwean economy.
Finally, Doctor, judging by reports that was put out last month, South Africa and Nigeria have been added to the grey list by the Financial Action Task Force. So these two countries have been grey listed according to reports. Now, is Zimbabwe also working towards avoiding such? Because that will put a dent on its image, and it will bring some sort of financial restrictions for the country when it comes to securing credits from international creditors.
Yeah, we're actually working on that. The government has recently, or is actually on the verge of gazetting the Private Voluntary Organizations Amendment Bill, which really speaks to some of these issues of money laundering and trying to make sure that at least whatever money is coming into the NGO sector is actually clean money. So they actually attempts a move by government to amend the Private Voluntary Act to try to deal with some of the challenges with respect to the issues of money laundering and illicit financial flows.
Finally, before I let you go, Doctor, let me quickly chip this in. How optimistic are you that the Zimbabwean government will be able to put their best foot forward, most especially as the meeting that they're hoping to have next month will be coming up with the international community? How do you think they should present their case so as to attract that much investment that is needed for the capital markets to ensure that, of course, it blossoms and it becomes robust within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Well, I think I can say I'm cautiously optimistic. I think what we need to be focusing on is the reform agenda, really, and trying to assure the investors that we will be able to expedite some of the institutional reforms and even the key macroeconomic reforms that are necessary to bring down the high inflation rate, so as to make sure that the economy is very stable for capital inflows and also for foreign direct investments inflows.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Prosper, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.